Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jordan and today we're going to be talking about some popular books that I just did not like. Now some of them I genuinely hated and some of them I just thought were okay and just not worth the hype. Some of them might be a surprise to you and some of them, if you're familiar with my channel, probably won't be. But let's just get right into it and dive in. Okay, so if you are familiar with my channel, this will definitely not be a surprise to you. And the first book that I'm going to talk about is Throne of Glass. Now I've only read this first book, but I didn't continue with the series because I did not like it. I thought that it was full of cliches, the plot was predictable, and the characters were so boring. Overall, I just felt that all of the characters fit cliche YA archetypes and none of them felt original or really called to me. And this is especially true for Selena, who is the main character. She just kind of fits the sassy bad girl character who's witty and flirty and bantery. To me, she just didn't really bring anything new or interesting to the table, and that can also be said for Dorian, who's the prince and one of her potential love interests, as well as the villains and Chaol. The only character that I found really interesting was Nehemia, and even then I thought that the author could have done a lot more with her character. I do have a full review on this book though, so if you'd like to see that, I'm going to link it in the description down below. The next book, while not widely loved, was popular on booktube for a hot second there because of the authors, and that is of course Zenith, the Drama Saga by Sasha Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings. And if you are familiar with my channel, you'll know that I don't like this book either. I have also done a review on this one, which I will link down below. It's very in-depth. It's 40 minutes. If you have time for that or are interested, you can go watch. But to basically sum it up, I thought that this book was a hot mess. There are way too many perspectives. There are 6 perspectives in this book, and it really only needed 1 or 2. I thought that the plot was fairly nonsensical and went from scene to scene without really having an overarching story that made a lot of sense. I again thought that the characters were fairly cliche and none of them really surprised me or connected with me, and I thought that the side characters in this book, as well as the protagonists, were just really underdeveloped. Not to mention the world, which was so underdeveloped that I barely understood it at all. Basically, there really wasn't much that I found redeemable in this book at all. The next one on the list might surprise you guys, and that is Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. While I didn't absolutely hate this book, I didn't particularly like it either, and that's because the characters were okay, but I didn't find any of them extremely compelling. I didn't find the love story to have much chemistry, but the primary reason that I hated this book was the ending. Now, I'm going to get into some spoilers with that, so if you haven't read this book and want to, just skip to when I put the book down. So basically, this book follows Madeline, and she has a super rare disease, which basically means that she cannot leave her house, nor can she really meet anyone from the outside, except for the kind of nurse lady that will come every day and she gets like sanitized. So her life kind of sucks. It's very boring until Ollie moves in next door, and they basically have a blossoming romance through text and messages until finally she's able to meet him and they go on an adventure, and then it turns out that it was all a lie. She doesn't actually have this disease and her mom is just kind of crazy and kept her inside because she wanted to protect her, and it was all a lie. And I just thought it was very poorly executed. I didn't end up caring that much. I thought that it was kind of cliche and hard to believe. I just was not a fan, but I do see why people like it. It just didn't connect with me. So the next one on the list is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Now, I absolutely did not hate this book, but I just thought it was mediocre at best. I did not connect with this character at all, or any of the characters in this novel as much as I wanted to. I was really excited and hyped about this book, which is I think why I found it to be so mediocre and disappointing. Because the thing is, I haven't really seen or met anyone who has disliked this book, so I went in with very high expectations and then was disappointed. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong about it. I just find V.E. Schwab's writing to be very hard to connect with. For some reason, even though it's third person, it feels almost omniscient. Like, it's very hard for me to get inside the characters' heads, even though it is third person limited, which is strange for me. And I had this problem with her other book as well, A Darker Shade of Magic, so I think it's just a problem with me not being able to connect with the author's writing rather than a problem with the actual book. That being said, I actually really did like the structure of this book and the way that the plot played out. I just couldn't enjoy it as much because I didn't really care for the characters. Okay, so the next one I might actually get a little bit of hate for, and that is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. I really like the Hunger Games series, especially the first and third books, with Mockingjay being my absolute favorite, but I did not care for Catching Fire, which is weird, I guess, because most people think that this is the best book. This is most people's favorite book of the series, and I find that the majority of people really didn't like Mockingjay. But oh man, I just thought that this book was very poorly paced. I thought that the games did not last long enough at all. The focus of the book was just kind of in all the wrong places. Like, for me, the start of this book was just way too long. The pacing was super slow and it just felt like a slog. And then we got to the games and that felt so rushed. Like, it felt like we skipped over a ton of stuff, and by the end, I had a vague idea of who all the other competitors were and who all the kind of like resistance people were, but I didn't really know who they were. Like, I knew their names and generally their roles, but I didn't know their characters, and that was a huge issue for me. So while I didn't absolutely despise this book, I did not like it, which is like low-key disappointing for me because I really like the series, and overall I have a positive experience with the series as a whole, but this book I just found to be bad. And like, that's the thing, I've reread the series probably 3 times and I just skip over this one every time because I can't put myself through it. Okay, so the next one I actually liked when I first read it, and then when the rest of the books came out I started to like it less, and then when I reread it I realized that I in fact did not like this book, and that is Divergent by Veronica Roth. The first time that I read this book, I really enjoyed the dystopian world and Triss and all of the different characters. I thought that it was well crafted, but then as I started to read more and more dystopia, I realized that the world building wasn't actually as good as I thought, and as the book series progressed, I just got more and more disappointed, and then upon the reread I was like, there are so many holes in this that it looks like Swiss cheese. I also have a review on this though, so I'm not going to dive in too deep. Instead, I'll just link that in the description down below if you want to know my thoughts. Okay, so the next one on the list was actually gutting for me because I wanted to like this book and series so much, and that is Mistborn: The Final Empire. I actually never even read the other 2 books in this series, and I want to give it a try. But for some reason, this took me so long to read. Like, this took months to read, and this was the only book that I was reading because I read books one at a time. I can't do multiple books at once, so I just went into a huge reading slump reading this. And I really, really wanted to like it. In fact, there were a lot of elements that I did enjoy in this book, namely the magic system. The magic system in this book is absolutely spectacular. I love hard magic systems that have clear rules and feel like they're really well defined, so I thought that that was such a great element of this story. But for some reason, the characters were just so bland to me, especially the protagonist. Okay, so now I'm just gonna give a couple spoilery thoughts, so again, just skip over until the book is down if you don't want to know. But oh boy, I know Kel is extremely beloved in this book series, but for some reason I just found him to be mysterious, and not in the good way, almost in the underdeveloped way. Like, I wish we knew him more. I could not connect with him, and I think that's because of his relationship to the protagonist, because I really didn't care for her at all. I don't know what it was. I have a hard time pinpointing what it was about the characters in this novel, but for some reason I just found them to be so dull. And another issue I had was the pacing. It is a fairly substantial book. It's pretty long, and I just felt that the pacing was too slow. And like, this is coming from a girl who really enjoys world building, and I don't mind, especially if the first third or half of the book is slow. If it starts to pick up, then I forgive it because I realize how hard fantasy is with world building and all the different elements of introducing a magic system and characters and worlds that we don't necessarily know. So I'm fairly forgiving with slow pacing, but man, oh man, this book was a slog. I could not get into it. I almost want to try to reread it though, because this was so many years ago that I did read this novel, that I feel like maybe my tastes have matured a little bit and I might be able to enjoy it in ways that I couldn't before. Because I also am curious about the rest of the books. Like, the cover of this book is so beautiful and I really, really want to like it. So I feel like I might give it another try at some point, but for now it's sitting in my don't like pile. The next one is The Scorch Trials by James Dashner. I love The Maze Runner. I love the book and I adored the movie, but The Scorch Trials and every book afterwards is hot garbage. The series took an absolute nosedive after the first book, and I think that's because he didn't really know where it was going. It felt so poorly developed and thought out. Like, the whole disease makes no sense. There's no real reason why the kids are in the maze in the first book. Like, no solid reason. I know it's kind of explained, but it doesn't make sense. And that's like the whole series, is just them chasing things for no clear reason, because nothing makes sense to me in the story because it's poorly thought out and developed. I actually don't mind the characters. I like the characters in this book, but I like them less and less as it progressed because it was just so hard to follow their thought processes, because the world didn't make sense. So it just kind of descended into this pit of chaos, and overall it was just such a huge disappointment. Okay, this next book I actually hated with a burning passion. Like, some of them I'm like, they weren't great, they were fine, they weren't awesome, but this one was awful. And that is Every Day by David Levithan. This book is an absolute disaster. Basically, the story follows this being who doesn't have a body, and every day they wake up in a different body that is the age that they are. So they're born, and each day they inhabit a body born on the next day. So like, they'll age as they, you know, as anyone would. And I think it has to be in like a certain mile radius that they'll wake up to, like, as the next person. It's kind of confusing, but that's the least of this book's problems. First off, the main character is so selfish and awful. Like, I get that that would be a hard existence, just not having a body, not knowing where you're going to wake up the next day, not being able to make friends or have any sort of stability in your life. But like, the things that this character does to the people's bodies, they just seem to have no regard. And I get that that would be a hard existence, but I also don't think that it makes the character likable or like redeemable, because it's just so hard to forgive. This character kisses other people in this body, and like, that body isn't consenting to it. Like, they don't know if the person is aware deep down that they've been taken over or what's happening to their body. They're not sure whether the person is aware, and so by kissing someone, that's so wrong to me. And on top of that, the love interest is also awful. Like, I also hate her. So all of the characters are selfish and awful, and I hate. The story is about two characters falling in love that I hate, so I hate that. There's no chemistry between the two of them. Like, it makes no sense to me that the love interest would love this character, because it almost seems like she's just doing it because her current boyfriend is more awful. Like, none of this is good. It's all bad. And I heard that there's a sequel or like a spin-off from her perspective, and that makes me also mad because she's the worst. So, hot garbage, really didn't like. Moving on. So this was another one that if you know my channel, you won't be surprised about. And that is The Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. So this book is a YA fantasy that follows Mare Barrow. She is a red, and reds are like the lowest tier of society, and they're governed by silvers. She basically gets sucked into the silvers world, and then there's a bunch of stuff about her dealing with that world and trying to help the reds and, you know, all the expected things that would happen in that scenario. I hate Mare. I hate Mare so much, and I'm not going to get into this in depth because I have a review on it, so I'm going to link that below, but she is the worst. She is such a weak protagonist. She makes no decisions. She's very whiny. She's not likable at all, and she has absolutely no character development, and that can also be said with pretty much every character in this book. Most of them do not have any form or semblance of character development, let alone an interesting character to begin with. The world is underdeveloped in this book. I know that a lot of people have commented saying that it gets more developed, but in this book there are a ton of holes in the world building, and the plot was fairly expected. Nothing really shocked me. I think the plot was probably the least weak point out of any of the aspects of it. The writing was pretty unspectacular, but yeah, just overall it was a mess, and I really didn't like it. And last but not least, I have City of Bones. Now, this is a fairly beloved series on booktube, but we're going to talk a little bit about it. Now, a lot of people have asked me to do a review on this series, and I simply refuse because The Authentic Observer did a whole series on why these books are garbage, and I'm going to link those down below as well because I think she said it better than I ever could. But yeah, I really did not like this series. Clary is not a very interesting or likable protagonist, but I think that that is the least of my issues with this book. The pacing of this book is awful. It's way too fast, and that can be said for the rest of the series too. The pacing is very inconsistent, and I think that that is a huge issue throughout. On top of that, there is a lot of really weird themes and messages that it's portraying. The writing is really awful, and just overall I found it to be wrought with cliches. It ranged from like mediocre, like this is fairly bad, which I think that this book is, to being really bad, and I think that that is primarily because there are a bunch of weird aspects explored, like, you know, incest and all of the other things, but also I just feel like it was supposed to be 3 books and she just stretched it out into whatever 5 or 6 that it is because it was making money. Like, it didn't feel like it was properly planned. It felt like the other books were tacked on. It wasn't telling a cohesive arc or story. There was, again, very little that I liked about this book series. Alright guys, so that is it for popular books that I did not like. I feel like I could do another video because I have a lot more that I could talk about, but those are the most kind of popular ones that I could think of. If you guys did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you'd like to see a video kind of opposite, where maybe I talk about books that are unpopular or unknown books that I really did enjoy, or maybe unpopular books that I didn't like, let me know. I don't know what you guys want to see, but if you have any ideas for other videos, comment down below. Also, if you have read these books and have thoughts, if you agree or disagree with me or have popular books that you don't like, let me know that as well in the comments down below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.